My Licorice is alive with Clifford Brown's signature composition, Joy Spring. Joy Spring was first recorded with drummer extraordinaire Max Roach and Los Angeles tenor man Harold Land in 1954. And Joy Spring has also been recorded by jazz icons Oscar Peterson, Buddy DeFranco, and Stan Getz. And Clifford Brown was a true shooting star in the jazz firmament. A giant on the jazz trumpet, his life was sadly and tragically cut short by a car accident at the tender age of 25. Yet he left behind 4 years of recordings that live to this day. So hello, everybody. After a ton of travels following the political mayhem in the Caucasian caucuses up in Iowa, and then that primary in the cradle of the Confederacy way down in South Carolina, I'm finally back here, home sweet home, in my movie studio apartment, my little cradle, my self-quarantined little box in the wood of the holly under the sign overlooking the corona-crazed land of law. What just a few short weeks ago was a full-on Democratic demolition derby with multiple candidates careening and crashing into each other has winnowed itself down to just a top-fuel drag race between the killer bees, with the red diaper baby Bernie in the left lane and big bad Joe Biden in the right lane. No, I don't think that's fair. Biden is really in the center lane. Or actually, let's put him in the center left lane. You know, the establishment lane. So with the world watching, the two septuagenarians rev their motors. To be sure, Biden had assembled the better pit crew with Mayor Pete, Kamala, Corey, Amy the Clo, and Uncle Tom Steyer right there to help him out. And for his money, Bernie had AOC and the squad with Jesse Jackson working his pit. Anyway, when the green light flashed, Bernie's engine roared, then sputtered, then rolled to a stop as Biden blasted past the checkered flag, grabbing the lion's share of delegates from Michigan, Missouri, Mississippi, Idaho, and maybe Washington. We're still counting. So, as of this moment, drama-wise, the Demo Demolition Derby is by all rights over. Delegate-wise, the fat lady, whoever she is singing her song. Anyway, here's my takeaway for what it's worth. Plainly and simply, folks aren't all down for the revolution that Bernie was promising. The folks weren't ready to man the barricades or charge the corporate manor house or even get back in their tent from the old Occupy days. With a killer virus on the rampage, primary voters are just trying to make sure they have Purell in their pockets. And right now, folks are down for the stability and competency thing. They're looking for the capable captain, especially with that imbecile blowhard Captain Ahab Bly running things. So for the time being, we can hold off on the revolution, Chairman Mao Bao, for another time. So thanks for the memories and the policies, Bernie. I love you, bro. I really do. The truth is, except for Hannity and lovable Limbaugh, that Corona V has got folks freaked with a capital V. As of this moment, the folks in the Fed don't have enough test kits, and under the direction of the PVP, that self-described medical genius otherwise known as Putin's vice president, the folks in our government are desperately trying to figure out if the Corona V is a Republican virus or a Democratic virus. And as of this writing, we just don't know. Now, according to the folks at Fox News, the virus is probably Democratic, but frankly, I'm not so sure. I mean, it turns out that a few Republican representatives, including Ted Cruz, have self-quarantined themselves because they shook hands with some evangelical dude who tested positive for it. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just a plain old independent virus. They got to get that Corona V genome under a microscope and see if it has a capital D in it or a capital R in it. Now, if it has both a D in it and an R in it, then maybe those two star-crossed lovers, Mitch and Nancy, might actually be able to agree on something. Oh, well, we'll see. What we do know is that the virus not only kills humans, but it also, and this is really the scary part for the PVP, this particular virus terrorizes investors. Just one look at the stock market will tell you that. Now, the good news is that the PVP put his VP Pence in charge of the whole deal. Now, I know that puts me at ease because of the incredibly great job the PVP's VP did praying that the AIDS virus thing would go away way back when he was governor of Indiana. I mean, he's already helped slow the new virus down with developing that elbow bump. No more handshaking or fist bumps. That's over. We've moved up the point of actual human physical contact to the next major joint, the elbow. Apparently, the coronavirus doesn't like to hang out by the elbow. The elbow is crusty and dry, and no self-respecting coronavirus would be caught dead hanging at the elbow. So good on you, Mike, for keeping us all safe. And one more thing. It is also comforting to know that LeBron has changed his position and is now willing to play basketball, even if no fans come to any of his games. But alas, even that consolation came too late. Last night, they suspended the NBA season, so we can't even watch him on TV. And as of today, they also canceled the hockey season. But frankly, I was for that years ago, folks. Okay, enough virus talk, at least for today. Back to South Carolina. My first takeaway from my South Carolina trip is that the food was fantastic. I had my share of fried catfish and grits and fried green tomatoes and barbecue pork ribs and hush puppies and collard greens and oysters and crab cakes and crispy shrimp. I visited the Confederate Museum and saw a collection of battle flags and muskets and gray uniforms and old photographs of long-forgotten men who died in obscure places like Antietam and Shiloh, Fredericksburg and Manassas. And then I walked through the old Charleston market and then made my way down a warren of old cobblestone streets near the waterfront to the old slave mart, which, fortunately, is now a museum that memorializes the millions of black folk for whom this spot was their first stop on their way to achieving the elusive American dream. Nightmare. Now, politics-wise, my main takeaway was that the black folks of South Carolina saved Biden's bacon. Now, my first clue of what was going to go down came when I attended an early breakfast at a Baptist church in North Charleston, hosted by the Right Honorable Reverend Al Sharpton and the Right Honorable South Carolina political icon, Congressman James Clyburn. Exhausted and bleary-eyed from their debate the night before, all the candidates were there except for Bloomberg, who got stopped and frisked outside the chapel. But Bernie and Joe, Mayor Pete and the Clo, Elizabeth and Uncle Tom Steyer all made their pitch. They all quoted from Scripture and made their case to the black parishioners who all the while were happily gorging on scrambled eggs, sausage, and grits. It was quite a sight to see. All these northern white politicians on their knees begging for their political survival to these extremely polite southern black folk. And watching it all, I could feel the weight of so much history as it pressed ever so heavily on that moment. After all, these were the same southern black folk whose ancestors centuries ago were human chattel. Chained and manacled and disoriented from their middle passage from Africa, their ancestors trudged through the port of Charleston, where they were auctioned at the slave mart and marched off to the plantations. Of course, not all white folks owned slaves or had plantations. Of course not. That would not be fair. But if they didn't own slaves, they very well might have auctioned them, invested in them, marketed them, advertised them, leased them, insured them, cross-collateralized them, securitized them, mortgaged them, amortized them, and depreciated them. By that I mean you didn't have to own a slave to be caught in the cruel web of that peculiar institution. The whole of the American economy, from the plantations in the South to the factories in the North to the mills of Manchester and the investment houses of Wall Street and London, they were all wrapped in the ugly profits that slavery offered. And to deny that is to deny the origins of American capitalism and our first world economic order. The first arrivals to Charleston were sold and marched to the sugar plantations. And then, as native folks were evicted from their lands, those African ancestors were sent to farm tobacco. And finally, with the dawn of the 19th century, they were sent to the killing fields of King Cotton, which consumed their labor in huge, cruel gulps. And when Lincoln was elected, South Carolina was the first state to secede, and it was from the batteries of Charleston Harbor that the first cannon shots were fired on a small fort named Sumter. And with those shots, the conflagration began that consumed the lives of over 500,000 souls. Black and white, Southern and Northerners were drawn into a mosh pit of death and misery, all to decide a central question: should slavery exist? With defeat came the destruction of the old order, and then for a brief shining moment there was hope. The hope came first in the form of 3 constitutional amendments, 13, 14, and 15, that enshrined into law, respectively, the abolishment of slavery, full citizenship and equal protection under law, and lastly, the full franchise. By that I mean the right to vote was extended to all former bondsmen, at least to the men. The women would have to wait till the next century. Apparently, extending the vote to women was considered too heavy a political lift at that moment. And then that brief, shining moment is usually referred to as Reconstruction. Black folks seized their newly won citizenship and voted in record numbers. Black folks sent representatives to state houses and county seats, and even a black minister by the name of Hiram Revels was sent to the U.S. Senate. The federal government set up the Freedmen's Bureau, which introduced banks and credit unions for the previously enslaved, and the Freedmen's Bureau established schools to educate the newly emancipated. Freedom and the promise of restorative justice was in the air, but only for a while. Those 40 acres and that mule that General Sherman promised, well, they never came. And the white plantation owners kept their land, and after a short interval, they reclaimed their political power, and black folks were once again at the economic mercy of their former overseers. With the retreat of occupying Union armies, the Klan rose its ugly head. The Freedmen's Bureau was shuttered. The former slave became the tenant farmer, a feudal arrangement that meant that the farmer would spend his life paying his master in rents and cotton for the right to stay poor. But the tenant farmers were the lucky ones. The unemployed and landless were labeled vagrants and arrested and scooped up into prisons that were actually work farms, who sold their captive labor back to farms and factories and steel mills and road crews. And as the Klan and the lynching hordes terrorized, Jim Crow strengthened its iron grip on the South, and the nightmare that began in slave ships continued until the next century. But some progress came. albeit at a glacial pace. In 1948, Truman signed into law an anti-lynching statute, and with the stroke of his pen, integrated the armed forces. And with that, the old lost cause diehards, by that I mean the segregationists, well, they went apeshit. The formerly solid Democratic South splintered. South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond formed the Dixiecrat Party and ran for president. In 1954 came Brown v. Board of Education, and if you don't know what that was, look it up. But as the Democratic Party slowly embraced the civil rights agenda, the days of the solid Democratic South were numbered. After Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, those reliable Democratic votes were ripe for the picking. And in 1968, Republican Richard Nixon gobbled up those last old Southern Democrats, and since then, those racist rednecks have been forever Republican. The names have changed, but the sentiments have not. It was South Carolina that gave us that PVP enabler, Lindsey Graham, and it was South Carolina that gifted us a white supremacist goofball named Dylan Roof, who just a few years ago walked into a black church not far from that Reverend Al breakfast and killed 8 black parishioners. And it was 2 weeks ago in South Carolina where black folk saved Biden's bacon. With a big push from Congressman James Clyburn, they rescued him from defeat and the dustbin of history, and I was privileged enough to bear witness with my own eyes. So there you have it. You want to hear more about Biden's big day? Check out my previous episode, Browns Ferry, South Carolina. It really takes you there. Anyway, folks, stay smart and safe. And as for myself, I got Purell in my pocket, feeling strong as a rocket with power in my socket. I ain't gonna mock it. I'm good. At least I hope so. So, folks, till next time, namaste, shalom, and aloha. Nama shalom.